Good morning everyone, and welcome to our second lecture. This one will be about the coffin bone, the navicular bone, the long and short pastern bones, and the proximal sesamoids. I hope those of you who were unable to attend last time had a chance to catch up on the recordings, and so we can continue today with exploring these skeletal structures in great detail, and hopefully we can bring a little bit light into how this is all constructed. When we are talking about the hoof in general, we need to realize that the hoof capsule is a cast of the coffin bone. And I had yesterday a discussion with a gentleman who was very surprised that the bone structure of the coffin bone itself could change, that the form could change over time. He was not aware of this. This is very much so, and this gives us great pause when we are trimming, to see what we can do and what we cannot do. So all of this has really an impact on further lectures when we talk about trimming and why we can do certain things and why we cannot do them. So this anatomy has actually a hands-on, later on value. Let's talk today about, first of all, about the coffin bone. What you see here is actually a model of a coffin bone. It is not the real thing. I have one in a moment that is real, but this one is about as close as it comes to healthy. So this coffin bone has its distal border. Remember, we talked last time about the terms. The distal border here, and these structures here are named the palmar processes. This here is the extensor process. This is where the extensor tendon attaches. It attaches actually in this whole area. And this is the area where the short pastern bone attaches to the coffin bone. Here you have a real specimen. It's not healthy at all. Again, you have the distal border here all around, the palmar processes, the joint surface to the short pastern bone, and the extensor process. These are so the most important structures at the moment. This is a view of the same model coffin bone from the side, with the toe line, the distal border, the extensor process, also known as the pyramidal process because it's shaped so a little bit like a pyramid. The joint surface to the short pastern bone, also known as P2, and the palmar processes here in the back, both sides. Here you have the same structure from the front. Extensor process, very prominent here. The palmar processes can be seen here in the back with their top area. And the distal border, which you see is a little bit lifted here, and that is not quite normal. That is the kind of change that I was talking about, and we will talk in later lectures how this comes. Bone gives very easily to pressure, and if the coffin bone is not sitting in the hoof capsule in its correct way, if it is tilted a little bit to the front, the bone may receive too much pressure in this area and therefore recede. Here we have a coffin bone superimposed on a hoof capsule, just so you can see how it sits in the hoof capsule. This is most likely not the coffin, the skeletal structure of the horse behind it, but it gives you an idea where the coffin bone sits in the hoof capsule with its extensor process here towards the top of the hairline. In an ideal case, it would be even higher. It would sit here. This is another model that just shows a little bit better relationship of coffin bone to hairline. You would have the hairline being right here, and you see how relatively high the coffin bone sits, but again, this is a model with magnets and can be manipulated rather easily. So I can probably make another picture and push it a little bit higher. That's really not the point. The point is that the extensor process of the coffin bones should sit about at equal height with the hairline. Same model from the back. These are all the bones we will be talking today about. And the coffin bone here, this is actually what you see here is the navicular bone. But this is the coffin bone and how it sits here in relationship to the hairline from the back. When we look at this picture, we could get easily the impression that the coffin bone is a rather sharp bone that has a totally different form, because this is just a cross-section. And in books about hoof care, especially in farrier texts, you see a lot of these drawings or pictures, cross-sections through the hoof. And that could easily lead to the wrong conclusions. This is a sagittal cut, a cut across from the front to the back, and I will show you in the next picture how this comes together. If you look real close in this picture, it is a sagittal cut through the middle of the coffin bone. So the entire coffin bone, or the other half, the half of it, sits back here with the extensor process here. And the middle, because the bottom of the coffin bone is vaulted, the sole side is vaulted, looks as if it is very sharp, but it actually is not. And this becomes hopefully a little bit clearer when you see this picture from Overland from the Swedish hoof school, where he has cut a coffin bone apart and then tried to set it up so that you can see both sides. The underside of the coffin bone is vaulted. Remember I said the hoof capsule is a cast of the coffin bone, and you know how in a healthy horse the sole is actually vaulted. And so is the coffin bone. So what you see here in the middle of the coffin bone is the solar vault. And this is the other half. If you put the two together, you have a full coffin bone again. Here we have some pictures, courtesy of Todd Morrell, of a ancient coffin bone, millions of years old, when humans weren't around yet, but horses were already around. So I just thought this was interesting to show you how so many years ago the coffin bone actually hasn't changed a whole lot. It looks pretty much the same. It may have been smaller, but it still has the same shape. And here we have the coffin bone, which is, by the way, also known as the distal phalanx, which veterinarians are very intent on naming it this and not the coffin bone. And since I'm not American, I'm wondering why it's named coffin bone. Is it because if this thing doesn't function, your horse is dead? I don't know. Maybe somebody can explain this to me. So we see the coffin bone here one more time from the side and from the front and from behind, where the solar vault becomes apparent. And in this picture here, it is also apparent that the sole is vaulted. And we will talk in a later lecture about how much vault we have in different coffin bones. And trust me, it is really hard to find a good, healthy coffin bone. And if anybody has one, they really guard it. You can be lucky if you're allowed to make a picture of it. Not so easy. So once again, this is the extensor process. This is the dorsal wall, the frontal wall. This is the joint surface to the short pastern bone and the palmar process. And here you have the whole thing without the writing. I would suggest that you make really extensive notes in these lectures, and you also learn to draw these structures. It becomes so much more clear once you can really draw it. Take the picture away and sit down and say, do I remember how the coffin bone looks from the side, from the front, from behind, and even from the sole picture, and from totally above. Because this will give you so much a better feel about your hoof capsule later on. It is amazing what this does. Even if you can't draw well, you're doing this for yourself only anyway. Even if you can't draw well, don't worry about it. Do it anyway. It schools your eye tremendously, and then later on you can pull out the picture and say, I missed this part, or I missed this part. It has helped me a lot, and it also helped me later on to teach better because I now can draw these things. In very healthy coffin bones, the frontal surface, the toe surface here, to the ground is in a front foot about 45 degrees to the ground. In a hind foot it is about 55 degrees to the ground. In a healthy foot. As I said, we don't see that many of those. So keep this in mind. It is here 45 degrees and it is here 55 degrees. That's that angle. This will come in handy when we talk about how to trim, big time, and in a different way than some of you who are already used to trimming to these angles know already. We have a little bit of different view on this. A picture from Cheryl Henderson. Cheryl Henderson has a lot of good pictures. She has the Oregon Hoof School, and a lot of those pictures basically depict the same things that we are teaching. So here again you have the 45-degree toe line on a front foot and a 55-degree on a hind foot. Unfortunately, these pictures are not taken quite from below, from ground level, so it gets deteriorated a little bit. This is another picture from Cheryl Henderson. She has made quite some different studies about the coffin bone, and so what you have here on the top is a mature Mustang, and it's not said if these are fronts or backs, and measuring them you really have to look at a lot of other parameters to get it right. Is this a front or a back? But what you see here is that this is a very dense bone altogether. And here we have a domestic bone that is also fairly dense, the number 2, and the number 3 and 8 look also decent in the side view, whereas the number 11 is a little flat, and then it's hard to tell because this one seems to have lost a lot of toe. It's not sitting quite right. So I have no history of these pictures, I just have the picture. So just to keep this a little bit in mind. Now when we look at the same numbers from the front, we have again the Mustang hoof and the domestic hoof. We have on the domestic hoof here a little bit side bone, which is actually, just to preempt some questions, it is some calcified lateral cartilage, which happens quite often. This domestic hoof also looks good. The Mustang hoof actually does on the distal border not look quite so good. See how crooked it is and how frayed it is. Then the number 8 is not very healthy. It also has a lot of fraying here, which comes through unphysiological pressures. And this one actually looks from the front very good. And from the side it didn't. So it's just things to observe, not to draw conclusions from it. Just so to school your eye on this. The front foot in the coffin bone of the front foot has a more shallow vault than the coffin bone of the hind foot. And therefore, we know that the concavity of the hind foot should be slightly more than the concavity of the front foot in a healthy foot. We're going to talk about the healthy foot for the first half of this whole course. We are coming to pathologies starting in lecture number 18. Until then, I point the one or the other thing out that's not working quite or that's a little bit odd, so you don't think that is healthy, but because I don't always have the right pictures, but we're talking about the healthy foot here. And here we have Cheryl's collection again with the different vaults in those coffin bones. Some are flatter, some seem to be steeper. So let's just go back to this for a moment. I want to show you something else. We also have here, when you look at these coffin bones, we have another thing that often happens, and this is that we have the Palmer process is here very slanted on the right side and very upright on the left side. And in this one here, it is very upright, very upright on the right side and very upright on the left side. So this leads me to suspect from this coffin bone that this is a very upright hoof, and this Mustang hoof was slanted on one side and the hoof capsule was very upright on the other side. But all of this again is speculation. But we have taken enough hoof capsules apart to make these conclusions that you really have coffin bones like this because they have given in, they have receded, the bone has receded from the pressure of the hoof capsule. Another Cheryl Henderson picture looking at the hoof from above. The front hoof is in general rounder, while the hind hoof is in general more spade-like. And this has something to do with the fact that the front hoof is more supporting and the hind hoof pushes more. This is just a collection of different sizes of coffin bones, smaller ones and bigger ones. It is, however, interesting that a draft horse coffin bone is actually not as hugely bigger as a regular horse. That was just something that was observed. Here she has tried to make some deductions of how the Palmer processes here in the back are shaped, and therefore where the breakover would be or where the balance point of the horse would be. And you see that all of these in the Mustang it is fairly straight, and in this domestic hoof that we thought it was looking fairly good, it is also very straight, and then we have some deteriorations there, and all of this comes from pressure from the hoof capsule. Pressure from the hoof capsule can come from incorrect trimming, incorrect shoeing, injuries. Whenever the hoof capsule is forced against the coffin bone, the coffin bone changes. These are entry points for the terminal arch and the digital arteries. So there are several holes in the coffin bone. This coffin bone is a little bit tilted up, and you see here the navicular bone inserted, which really sits like this. This is why you usually can't see it in a lateral picture. You can only see it from behind. Here again, this is how the navicular bone sits in the back, and it articulates. It has a joint surface here with the coffin bone, and this here is actually the joint surface for the short pastern bone. So the short pastern bone articulates with the coffin bone here and with the navicular bone in this area. And this picture just shows the navicular bone, how it sits behind the coffin bone and below the short pastern bone. Different coffin bones, different shapes from above. And here we have the same coffin bones in a collage from the side and then from the front. And you see here where the Palmer process is marked, this is actually a little bit the start of side bone. You have that here as well. And then you have it here a little bit more expressed. That's this ridge. Again, side bone is the calcification of the lateral cartilage. Just so you know what you're looking at. This here looks to be a undeveloped coffin bone where the Palmer processes are still very short. We get to this in a moment. Not a perfect coffin bone in a hoof capsule, but a perfect picture to illustrate how tight the coffin bone sits in the hoof capsule, and also gives you an appreciation, hopefully, how the coffin bone determines the shape of the hoof capsule, or how in the long run the hoof capsule can determine the shape of the coffin bone. This coffin bone sits a little crooked here. I have no history of this picture. The toe middle would be more here, and if we follow this down through the frog middle, you see that the extensor process is just a little off center. As I said, I have no history of this, and everything else is again speculation. But you can see how far back the Palmer processes go and how tight this all is. The rest is filled out with soft tissue, with lamellar corium, which we will talk about in a later lecture. This is a little bit a different angle. Again, we see how crooked this is in the hoof capsule, but also how it determines the shape of the hoof capsule and how the two interact. In this picture, the wall was taken totally out, and what you see here are this is the solar vault of the coffin bone and of the hoof capsule, and this here is the ridge of the bar. And what we see here is the navicular bone. Left this in. So far we talked about, in general, about the adult coffin bone that is fully formed. Here we have a picture on the right side of a foal foot, few days old, and the coffin bone that goes with such a foot. The palmar processes are hardly developed at all. They just are little nubs on the side. And we have here the joint surface for P2, for the navicular bone and P2, and the extensor process here. Everything is still very undeveloped, and it takes the coffin bone to grow to its entire size, to its fully formed adult size, 5 full years. So if you put a shoe on the horse and therefore don't allow the hoof to spread anymore before the age of 5, you will, without question, have limitations in the growth of the coffin bone, and therefore you will have later on limitations in the foot size. And it's not just shoeing, it is also management in horse husbandry that often forms a hoof too small, because this young hoof needs a lot of concussion from hard ground, needs a lot of movement to fully develop and to correctly develop. And if that is not happening, because, and I'm not trying to offend anybody here, I don't know what kind of horses you have and how you keep them, but if somebody breeds halter horses and the foals never get out of the stall, or very seldom, and the stall is in deep bedding, this hoof will not develop correctly, and you have later on horses with very small feet, and it is just not possible to breed the feet of a horse. The foot is a survival structure, and you cannot breed survival structures of horses, of any animal. It's not happening. This animal where you breed it off will not be able to survive and will not be able to reproduce. So here we have another specimen of foal coffin bone. This is from the sole view. Very tiny little palmar processes, probably a hind foot, because I'm just deducting this from the shape, and very large surface to the short pastern bone. But as you can see, this here is the palmar process. It is actually sitting under the surface of the short pastern bone. So there's not a lot of support yet. But also this bone does not yet have to carry a lot of weight. There's only a tiny body on top of it. And here you have the extensor process. Another collection of Todd Morell's pictures of foal bones, or actually it's one foal bone. Very short Palmer process here, and very undeveloped. So this takes time. Let them grow up, preferably on large acreage, preferably in the company of other horses, and that means the same age group, so they can run and play and get strong. It never ceases to amaze me how people raise horses on smallest acreage, and they actually have invested a lot to breed their dream horse, and then they start this horse as a 3-year-old on their saddle, and as a 5-year-old this horse comes lame because all the structures that are essential to real performance are underdeveloped because this horse never moved enough as a foal or as a youngster. So much about the coffin bone. And now we have this little nasty navicular bone that is so much talked about and is so much blamed for all kind of inconsistencies in gaits. So here we have such a navicular bone. It's named this way because it's shaped like a boat, and this surface here is the surface here is the surface that connects to the short pastern bone, and here this surface connects to the coffin bone. And the impar ligaments, which also cause a lot of trouble, are connecting here on the sides. Or the impar ligament, actually it's only one ligament, not two or more. So again, we had this picture already just marked up a little bit different earlier. This is how the navicular bone sits in the back of the hoof. Something else to practice drawing. And here in this sagittal cross section, we actually have it sitting here. And you also can see the ligament that holds it there, together with its own cartilage that connects it to the cartilage of the short pastern bone. And you see how in relation this is very small. And what's important to understand is, and this is perfectly shown in this picture, this is why I'm already mentioning it here, the deep digital flexor tendon comes out of the coffin bone where it is attached on the underside totally straight, and then changes over the navicular bone directions. The navicular bone is also known as the distal sesamoid, to set it apart from the proximal sesamoid, which is the bone that we know as sesamoid bone. But sesamoid bones are there to change directions of the tendon. That's what their job is. That's why they are inserted there, so that the tendon can glide easily over this structure. Very important to remember that the tendon is set into the coffin bone straight from the bottom. Make a big note on it and underline it. It will come back. Here we have a little bit of different sagittal cut, just to one more time show you this. The impar ligament here and the joint, the cartilage of the bone that allows it to articulate here on this side with the coffin bone and on this side with the short pastern bone. When you look at a radiograph, this is what you see. You see here the coffin bone in its lateral form. Again, it looks a little bit as if it is very sharp and sitting in a downward fashion, but that's not so, because this here wasn't quite drawn right. This here is the surface, distal surface of the coffin bone. Then we have here the navicular bone sitting in its correct space. And we'll talk about the short pastern bone in a moment and about the long pastern bone as well. Here is a different view of a half hoof capsule and half skeletal structure, with the coffin bone here in the front, then the navicular bone, short pastern bone, and the long pastern bone. Let's talk about these other bones that are really important. What is important to know about them is this is the long pastern bone, and it has on both sides notches that make these joints saddle joints. And in a saddle joint, that a bone that has saddle joints can only move back and forth. It cannot move sideways. This is the same bone seen from the side. And here we have a picture of the short pastern bone, which also has saddle joints. So this entire structure here is made in such a way, and you can see that notch here that fits perfectly into the notch of the long pastern bone. This entire structure is only meant to move back and forth. It is not meant to move sideways. And if it moves sideways by force, you have a lot of ligament damage, or at least strain and stress. And we'll talk about this as well later. But just so you see this. And finally, we have the sesamoid, the proximal sesamoids. And as I said, the deep digital flexor tendon comes out here straight, then goes over the navicular bone up here to the sesamoid bone, and changes over the sesamoid bone directions again, so it can go straight up the leg. That is the reason why these bones are here, the proximal sesamoid bone and the navicular sesamoid bone in the back. And that basically concludes our lecture for today. I would like to invite some questions at this time, or comments. They do not need to be related to what I just have said. They also, if you have any questions about anything else, I'll be glad to try to answer them here. Yes, Kathy.
I was wondering, I have an Appaloosa that has very flat feet, and would that mean that he likely has a flatter solar vault on the coffin bone?
Yes.
Okay.
Could be, could be. You
Okay.
know, depends on the age, depends on the history, depends on how long he has this already. How long is this flatness already existent?
Right. I think a lot of his flatness was caused by over trimming. He was shod when I got him, and he's been barefoot with me for about 9 or 10 months now, and he's actually developing some concavity. So it's quite exciting to see that. But another question I had is you had some pictures with a crooked coffin bone in the hoof, and I was wondering if that would be evident in a live horse by looking at the bottom of or looking at the foot.
Um, that depends how crooked it is. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but it's always evident in a radiograph. Do
Oh,
not underestimate the power of radiographs. It is really, really important. And it is for us as trimmers always very difficult to get radiographs. People want us to trim their horses, but when we can't make any progress and we ask for a radiograph, they balk at this because it's too expensive. I just want to go back to when you look. I want to come back to your first question. When you look at the coffin bone from behind, this is the best way
yes.
to look at it. If your if the distal border of the coffin bone wears off because there is a not so grand laminar attachment, and since I don't know what you know,
Mhm.
uh, if I expand on this, we're gonna be sitting here in
Yes.
2 hours still.
Right.
But the coffin bone could sink in its entirety a little bit down, and
Mm-hmm.
then the distal border wears off, and that makes for a flatter coffin bone. Yeah, then all of a sudden you don't have as much solar volt anymore. But if this is not in existence for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
then it is absolutely possible that the hoof starts healing, the laminar attachment gets better again, and gets tighter and pulls that coffin bone up, and then you get
Mm-hmm.
um, solar concavity.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
he's about 12, so we might be seeing that. So.
yeah. 12 is a. He's just starting to mature, really.
Yeah.
Peop
I had.
yeah,
Oh,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
I had one more question.
Hmm.
We have a 3-year-old colt, and he was raised on a large ranch with other horses and ran around a lot. And we got him about 3 or 4 months ago, and his feet are, of course, always been barefoot, and his feet are pretty good. But my husband does ride him some. Is that okay, do you think, or I mean, because he's only 3?
I don't know your husband.
Well, we don't ride him excessively, but
Yeah, it always depends what you do, when you do it, how you do it, all
right,
these things. How heavy is your husband? If your husband
right,
weighs 350 pounds, I would
no,
advise against it.
yeah.
Um,
No,
if your husband is an excellent rider and balances very well, it's that
mm-hmm,
I don't see a huge problem with this. I
right,
personally, but this is just between you and me, I
yes,
personally like to have my horses a little older before I start them on their saddle,
mm-hmm,
because I always think, what's the hurry? They are gonna get 40 years old, so why do I have to rush today? Um, and when you say we ride him already, this is such a blanket statement that really
yes,
tells me very little. Some people ride their horses once a week for 10 minutes. Others
right,
ride them every day for 1.5 hours and say, well, that wasn't much. There was still
mm-hmm,
10 hours of daylight left.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
no, I understand, yeah,
if you just walk them around on the trail or so, that's one thing on a loose rein. If you do already um, if you want to go with this horse to the 4-year-old championships and you're already drilling him um, for extended trot, then that may be a totally different picture.
Right. No,
You
it's
know?
it's mostly it's mostly walking on the trail. Yeah.
Yeah.
And quite a bit of ponying too.
Ponying is excellent. And he's a stud?
Yeah. No, he's a gelding.
Well, you said a colt. I always have
Yeah.
a problem with that. When they
Okay.
have colt breaking classes and there are mares in it, and I'm going, that's not a
Yeah.
colt. To me, a colt is a male intact horse of young age. So, no, ponying is excellent. Mileage is very important. Good trimming is important. And
Yes.
then you have a horse that you can have for a long, long time. You know,
Right.
I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I'm gonna be over 90 by the time they check out. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
So beware when you buy new horses or when you acquire new horses. Look at your own age and realize how long you may have them.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you, Kathy, for that.
Thank you.
Suzanne, can you turn it up a little bit? You're very, very low.
How's that?
Not much better, but I can hear you. I can repeat your question.
Okay, actually, you answered the question because I had a question about the sunken coffin bone and the flat foot. Just from some history with the horse I had, Teddy.
Yeah.
I was just curious, but you did answer the question. It really helped. That really helped me a lot. I want to thank you for that.
Okay.
And I wanted to make a comment that the pictures are just fantastic. It's really, really good. And that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Eva, do you have a microphone?
I do.
Yeah? Why don't you say something?
I didn't know I could. I thought I had to type something in and you had to invite me in. I wasn't sure.
No, I just have to unmute you, and there you are, and then we can talk.
Yeah. I do have a question. I don't know if I can formulate it correctly, but you said something about breeding the hoof form or the hoof shape, and I was wondering if you were referring to the good feet being bred out of our contemporary horses or not. Because that's a question or a comment I get a lot from clients and other people that, well, our horses are so domesticated and we bred the good feet out and we can't really do the barefoot thing because, well, you know the whole thing.
Yeah, I know the story.
So, yeah, so
Okay, I'll be
what
glad.
is a good response to this?
Well, what usually happens, I have never seen a young horse that has been on firm terrain with lots of movement that had an insufficient size of hoof or an insufficient hoof structure, which means, mushy bulbs or not enough hoof wall or and biggest deal, too small a hoof for the size of horse. And I hear this a lot from the quarter horse industry. Oh, they have just in the quarter horse industry bred the hoofs of the horses. And as I said, you cannot breed a structure like this off of a horse. But you have to look at management practices. And these little halter horses, they are so pampered, and people are so afraid that they could get cold or too hot, or they could get a bug bite, or they could hurt themselves out in the pasture, so they leave them in a stall, and they stand in deep bedding, and there is just not enough force from the bottom of the hoof to spread that young hoof. If we go back to this hoof, You see how it is almost inverted? It is not in a, if we turn this around, where's my pointer? A regular hoof from the front, a mature hoof looks from the front about like this. Hopefully not that crooked, but try to paint with a mouse, it's not so easy. A foal hoof, when the foal is newborn, looks more like this. Yeah, because when the foal is born, and you can see this a little bit, when the foal is born, and I have in a later lecture actually a foal hoof picture, when it is born, this is all very soft tissue and very pointed, so that it slides easily through the birth canal. And only when the horse stands on this and has firm ground will it start to spread.
Okay, so we have the same situation not just with quarter horses but with the thoroughbreds, and that's where I get a lot of comments. Oh yeah, the thoroughbreds, that it's been bred out of them, but they usually...
Especially the racetrack thoroughbreds, huh?
That's right, yeah. So
yeah.
They get the living conditions that are not optimal to allow for
yeah.
the...
Absolutely. I think it's horse husbandry. It is not breeding techniques. You do not breed. I mean, certainly, you know, what do people buy? They buy a thoroughbred to be raced on the racetrack from a horse that was successful on the racetrack, out of a sire and a dam that hopefully both were faster than lightning. And where did these young horses spend their time? In a stall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
very, very early in their life.
Yeah, very early in their life, and also, I hardly know. I cannot. I personally don't know, but I'm not saying this is standard. Most thoroughbred breeding farms bring their horses in at night. Yeah, so they're only out half a day.
Yeah. Or even if they aren't, where they grow up is in soft pastures, and
then it's soft pasture, and then in the pasture there is a lot of grass. You know, if you breed successful thoroughbreds, you don't have them on sparse pasture. You have them somewhere where there's really thick, lush grass, and the dam doesn't move a lot, and neither does the foal.
Yeah.
The foal doesn't meander far away from the dam, so it stays right there. And if there is not, we do something in Germany, or have done, I don't know how it is today, I'm so long away from this. And the word of this, when the foals get weaned, they go from their birthplace to something named, and you can appreciate this, Aufzüchter. That is a facility that does nothing else but raise young livestock. And they go into a herd where there are only weanlings, and then they grow up together, and they stay together till they are 3-year-olds, and then they go into training. And this is on large acreage, and they can run together, and they fight, and they play, and, you know, they do all the things that young horses should do. And they develop their tendons and their ligaments and their bone, and we know it from us as humans. Those who exercise a lot are a lot healthier than those who don't exercise. At least that's the common practice. And so the same thing is for young horses. If you want to raise a healthy horse, you have to exercise it a lot. And the prudent thing to do would be to take the mare every day and ride with her a long way, and the foal just comes along.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
go on long extended trail rides with her, take a break in between so the foal can rest a little bit and drink again, and then you go on for another hour or so, and you develop a magnificent young horse. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to
Yeah.
happen if he
Ideally.
stands in deep bedding in a stall.
Yeah. And
But
it
that,
just stays as narrow as it was
right,
in the
right.
beginning.
And then we
Yeah.
have these
Mm-hmm.
little canister feet that we see a lot in Arabians who are hard-hoofed horses, and we see them, and
Yeah.
that comes on top of it. The quarter horses and the Arabians, the Andalusians, they are hard-hoofed horses, and hard-hoofed horses tend to have a more upright foot to begin with, because they were bred, and that was really done over centuries for hard terrain, and
Mm-hmm.
just like the ponies, and that makes the problem even bigger.
Yeah.
So
I do have totally different question. I don't want to hog time. Do I have,
you can,
can I,
everybody is free to leave. I have no other hands up. I just, because this is such a small
okay.
group, there are only 5 on the call. So
Oh, yeah.
everybody who wants to hang around gets a chance to say something. And
Mm-hmm.
right now you have the floor.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, I have another question that's kind of puzzling me. As I trim, I have a few horses that show sort of, I want to call it a callus line, which is in continuation of the bar, and that goes almost all the way around the frog.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where does that come from, what do I do with it, and it usually goes along, I would say, with the very atrophied frog. What do I do? I can sometimes I trim it and see what does it do for the next time, and then it reappears. And so should I leave that or should I trim it away?
You
I'm
know,
puzzled.
this is one of those questions where it's pure speculation. Um,
Uh-huh.
if I don't see it, it's hard to
Yeah.
tell. But in general,
Mm-hmm.
let me ask you this: if you trim it away, does your frog expand? Not right away,
I
but
haven't.
the
No,
next
I
time.
haven't really seen that happen. No, it's back there the next time.
Yeah, and you know, there's sometimes you have to leave it depending on the entire situation. In order
Uh-huh.
to help you with this more, I would need to see some pictures. I would need
Yeah.
to have
Okay.
some history of the horse. How long are you
Mm-hmm.
trimming this horse? What is the lateral profile? You know, what's the soundness status of the horse, and so on.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
if the horse is not lame, if the horse is performing well, I would not mess with this.
Yeah. Do as little as possible.
Do as little as possible.
Yeah.
This is one of the mantras, at
Yeah.
least in our school. Because as you know, we come from a school where it was, well, if this isn't working, we just trim more, and then all of a sudden we had no hoof anymore on the horse.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
send me some pictures, will you?
Okay.
Very
Great.
good.
I will do that gladly. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay,
All
Eva,
right.
thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Claudia.
And we go to Jessica.
Hey,
Hi.
um, my big old thoroughbred mare blew an abscess in her bulb 3 or 4 days ago. What do you use? I soak it in water and apple cider vinegar. What do you do?
I use microorganisms or colloidal silver.
Okay, yeah.
Um, I apple cider vinegar is fine too. And I give simultaneously some arnica and some hypericum if they are very sensitive, just to allow the tissue to heal faster and to take a little bit the pain away. Hypericum is a homeopathic remedy that deals with nerve pain, and arnica is for trauma. And every time you blow an abscess, it's a traumatic situation. Take some arnica yourself.
Yeah, she scared the living crap out of me. I
Yeah.
thought she'd, yeah, that, oof,
Yeah.
oof, oh.
Yeah,
But I didn't realize it was an abscess at first. I'd been treating this hoof for scratches, and apparently the medication I've been using for the scratches, I was using a sulfur-based one, which I haven't used before, but it caused her periopal to disintegrate, and I thought she was blowing out her coronet, and she was sore, and she had heat in the foot, and I was panicking because I'm going, oh my God, she's doing something really weird with her coronet band, and then she blew an abscess out of her bulb, and I went, that's what it was.
Yeah.
So,
If it goes reasonably fast, you're lucky. Sometimes they're for weeks lame before that abscess finally comes out.
She's off the track thoroughbred and has a ridiculously high tolerance for pain. There was barely any gait abnormality, even when it was heat, and I'm going, she's dying. She's a very high tolerance for pain. So.
I can assure you, horses don't die that fast.
Yeah, I know.
We always think of them as extremely fragile, and I walked out to the barn this morning, and my little Welsh pony has a very sore spot right beside his tail. It's as if he rubbed it totally raw. And yeah, it's very discomforting, but he thought nothing about it. He said, I can't even see it. What are you talking about? Horses have naturally a high threshold of pain, because if they wouldn't have a high threshold of pain, they would be predators' next meal. You cannot limp around in nature when you are a prey animal. So they hide their lameness as a survival mechanism rather long. And we'll talk about this in a further lecture extensively, because this is important when we deal with them. Basically, all horses have a high threshold of pain, which makes it, when they become unsound, even more important to take care of it. The other thing, if any one of you is dealing with or suspecting to have an abscess, there is a remedy named HEPA sulfur, HEPAR, and then sulfur. It's a homeopathic remedy. Give them 1 dose of 30C, and the abscess will resolve faster. It just will come out faster, and that saves the horse some pain. Okay? Anything else, Jessica?
Nope, that was it.
Okay. Thank you. And Judith, do you have a microphone?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Oh, great. I have one question, and I'm hoping you don't think I'm too stupid to ask this.
There are no stupid questions. There are only extremely stupid answers.
This, when we were talking about breakover,
Yeah.
and you're measuring from the Palmer process on the coffin bone, how do you figure that on the outside of the hoof? Where is the Palmer process in relation to the bottom of the hoof?
I am not aware that I talked about measuring from the Palmer process the breakover.
Oh, well, one of those pictures from Cheryl Henderson, it had the crossover.
Let's go back there. One there.
There it was, that
Yeah.
one. Here.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is not measuring from the. I'm glad you asked this. good question. That way we can clarify it. This was not to measure the breakover. This is to try to make a deduction from the way the Palmer processes are shaped, where the breakover would be.
Okay.
That is kind of so playing around with some angles on a hoof. Is if you see a Palmer process that is here going very far out and here it is more narrow, how is this going to where's this going to put the middle of the hoof, and therefore in extension the breakover, but you cannot measure breakover from the Palmer processes.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, this is just if you so want, a scientific project. However scientific this is. You know, and I just like it because it shows different, it allows us to look at hoofs and at coffin bones in different ways. When I have a seminar, Judith, and I pass coffin bones around, everybody who looks at this coffin bone takes something totally different away from it. And that's why I like this here, because we can talk about this. We talked for over 30 minutes just about the coffin bone, and hopefully from every angle. And that will later on, when we talk about hoof capsules and what you can do with your trim and what you cannot do with your trim, this all becomes important. That's why we're looking into this in such great detail.
Okay.
Yeah?
Well, thank you for clearing that up for me.
Okay, thanks for asking.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you all have a little hand on the side of your panel, of your webinar panel, and if you have a question, please raise your hand. I can see it, and I can then call on you one-on-one. In the small group, we always can go through the whole group. Now that everybody has a microphone, that's fantastic. There are 2 people absent, but one is from Greece, and one is from, I don't know, I have to look this up. And some people just have signed up for the course but only take the recorded sessions. So I will